Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Can you believe it's the first Sunday of Advent? Isn't this crazy? But here we are, still November, in case you hadn't noticed. But here we have Christmas jumper and everything. Christmas jumper. Steve's got a Christmas jumper. Has anybody watched a Christmas film yet? No. Yeah, a few over there. Yeah, Tim. And was that a hand up from Brenda as well? Brenda's watched the film. Adam's watched. Adam, what Christmas film have you watched? The Grinch. What have you seen, Tim? You're not going to say. It's obviously very inappropriate. We'll pick up on that later, Tim. Anyone else? Yes, Maria. The which? The man who invented. I don't know that one. The man who invented Christmas. Was that? I think that was Jesus, Maria. I think that was Jesus. Yeah, of course. I'm just messing with you. That's great. Oh, who has seen Home Alone?
Two. Yeah.
Home Alone 2.
It was on after church last night.
Was it?
Yeah,
Oh no.
I went straight from YouTube to it.
Alicia's not a fan of Home Alone. I love it. And one year we were watching it and she switched it off just as soon as getting to the bit where he starts pranking all the guys. I've never forgotten about it. But this year we will watch it from start to finish. And I just thought I'd start with Home Alone. If you've not seen it, basically it's the film of this guy, this little kid. He's 8 years old, Kevin McAllister, and he's the youngest of 5 kids. And as the film opens, the scene is set, and basically it's like the whole family, and it's all of his family, and they live in this massive house in America. They've got all their cousins and their uncles and aunties there, and they're all getting ready to go on holiday in France, I believe. And Kevin's there, and he's just like a classic annoying younger sibling, and he's getting in the way. He's having arguments with people, and I think one of his older brothers orders a pizza. No, sorry, they all order pizza. One of his older brothers eats Kevin's pizza, and Kevin is so angry, but the injustice of it all, Kevin is the one who is sent to his room, and he goes to his room and he says, I don't even want to have a family anymore. And up he goes, and he's there in his room, and then of course you know what happens if you've seen the film. His family leave the next day for France. The alarm clock goes off late. Kevin's still in his room because he's a very good child, doesn't want to leave the room until he's told he can come out. And his mum's counting the kids onto the taxi, and I think she accidentally counts one of the neighbour's kids. I don't know what happens. Anyway, they all go to the airport, and they get on the plane, and they leave poor Kevin home alone in his room. And unbeknown to Kevin, what then starts to happen, if you know the film, you've seen it, the Kevin then starts to get basically tormented by a group of organised criminals in his house. Merry Christmas. And this makes us feel Christmassy, doesn't it? Here it is, 8-year-old boy being targeted by organised crime, and he's home alone, and it gets us in the Christmas spirit, doesn't it? We love it. And honestly, I don't know if you've ever, sometimes you watch these films and you start to peel back the layers, and you think, this is hilarious, but actually what's actually going on here is pretty horrific, isn't it? And there's Kevin, and I imagine that he starts to feel, obviously, beside the comedy, just really unsafe, and alone, and afraid. And he's there by himself, vulnerable. And part of me wonders whether the reason why that film connects to us so much and it's so popular is obviously partly because it has slapstick comedy genius, but also maybe because it reaches into something of our hearts of how we sometimes feel at Christmas time. For all sorts of different reasons, I think so many of us feel, don't we, home alone at Christmas for all sorts of different reasons, and resonate the way with how Kevin feels, unsafe, afraid, alone. I think sometimes what it is at Christmas time, we end up surrounded by so many, some of us anyway, so many relationships that are actually quite superficial, whether it's the work Christmas do, whether it's our wider family. There's one time a year that we see them, and there's all these relationships that all of a sudden we pick up on, and we get Christmas cards, if you still do Christmas cards. No one seems to do them anymore. And it's just like all of this, but it's all quite kind of relationships, but at a superficial level. And there's no real relational depth there. At least that's the way it can be sometimes. And that can be something that can actually, in the midst of being surrounded by people, start to make us feel very alone. For some of us, it might be because we don't have family. We obviously feel alone for that reason. For some of us, it will be the grief of a loved one, and it's just that time of year when those memories come up, and for that reason, we start to feel alone. For some of us, it might be the financial pressure of this, particularly this year, the financial pressure of the Christmas season, and that kind of need to feel like, to have the perfect, postcard Christmas, chocolate box Christmas, and we feel the pressure to provide that for our families, and being in that just as ourselves, as a parent or whatever, can make you feel alone. It might be all sorts of different things. It might be family tensions, and every year you dread seeing that particular family member. The one, like they look like they're all cute and innocent, but then you see their social media profile and and then when it comes to Christmas dinner, all this stuff comes out, and every year it's the same, and you dread it, and it makes you feel alone at Christmas. And a bit of a grim way to start. Merry Christmas, everybody. A bit of a grim way to start, isn't it? To think, but I actually think to recognize this at Christmas time is really, really, really important. To understand that this is actually a really dark time for lots of people is important, and to name it and to understand it, because what do we believe at Christmas? We believe, don't we, that the light comes into the darkness, but the darkness does not overcome it. Amen? Amen. And that is what we believe at Christmas time is happening for us. That's what we believe here this morning. And of course, we must understand, therefore, that actually, yes, the world is dark, and our lives may well be dark, and we may well experience that, especially at Christmas. But that's not a reason to feel and experience in spite of the celebration. That is actually the reason why we're gathered here this morning, to celebrate. Because actually, in spite of all of that stuff, there is light in the darkness. One of the things that I love about the Bible as you read through it is the fact that it does not hide any of this stuff. I think so many conversations I've had with people when they've been like, my problem with the Bible is it's just horrific. And in those conversations, I kind of want to say, well, yes, it is horrific. And the stuff that happens there is horrific. It's not what God wants. But it's real about human life, because this is what human life is like. Those you get those little books, you might have seen them, and they're like full of the promises of Jesus. Someone pointed this out to me recently. I thought it was funny. You get those books, they're full of the promises of Jesus, aren't they? And you turn to them, very encouraging. Here's another, promise for Jesus. The plans I have for you, plans for a hope and a future. And, but one of the promises you never find in those promise books is where Jesus says, truly, I tell you, or I don't know if it's truly, but it was one of those times, but he says, in this world, you will have trouble. You will have trouble. It's not one of those promises of Jesus that we cling on to, is it? But it's something that he says, something we have to come to terms with. In this world, you will have trouble. And I think as you experience that in your own life, and as you read it in the scriptures, there are times, and I think for me, I won't go over the story, because in some ways the story in the Bible feels too horrific to share in church, but Judges 19, if you know it, is an awful story of something that happens to a woman. And there's stories like that, and things I see in my own life that as I read it, I'm like, God, why do you not stop this? Why do you not intervene in the midst of all of this, Lord? What is going on? And it's just really challenging, isn't it? As you read through the scriptures, you probably ask that question in your own life. You probably ask that question. But I think the trouble is that if he was to stop and intervene and get rid of all evil, what would that mean? Does that look like him being loving or not? There's this quote here from a guy whose name I can never say right, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. It's the best I can do. And he was a prisoner in the Gulag, and he was a writer who wrote a lot about the evils of the Soviet Union. And he had experienced all kinds of absolutely horrific kinds of evil happening in his life. And surely he must have been someone that would have experienced those moments as we've experienced when we read the scriptures, where you cry out, God, why do you not just stop this? And this is what he says. He says, if only it were so simple. If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? It's not as simple as that, is it? If God was to step in, to eliminate all evil, that would mean eliminating every single one of us. Because we all stand here knowing that actually that line that divides good and evil, it cuts through our own heart, doesn't it? We'd love to think, that somewhere out there is the source of all evil and it's separated from us, and not realize that actually that place, that source of all evil is actually somewhere rooted inside of us. And so what God does is, although he will not, at least not yet, step in and intervene in terms of wiping out all evil, what we understand happens at Christmas time is that instead of him stepping in and wiping it out, he actually steps into the picture to join us in the midst of it. We cry out, God, stop. And instead of stopping it, he steps into our story and joins us and holds us by the hand. And that's the story of the incarnation. We were talking about this last week at Cafe Theology on the doctrine of the incarnation. And I shared a story that in the book, Cafe Theology by Michael Lloyd, he writes. And he says that one of the best ways to understand the incarnation, he says, is this story of a little girl who moves to, I think it was somewhere in South America, with her parents. She's from England, and she's 5-6 years old. And she decides that she doesn't really like it. She doesn't like the food, it's strange. She doesn't like her new school. She misses her friends and family and all the rest of it, as you would understand. And so she decides she's going to go home. So she packs a bag and she gets everything ready, and she tells her parents, I've had enough, guys, I'm going home. She walks out the front door, and instead of her dad stopping her and saying, don't be so silly, instead he says, well, okay, I better come with you. And so he goes out with her and he says, well, which way is it? And she says, I was left here with a lot of confidence, and then, and it's right here. And they walk for some way until all of a sudden she starts to get a little bit less confident. Eventually she breaks down and starts crying as she realizes that she's lost. And, that's so what it's like with God, that he doesn't stop us from walking into the lostness, because of all that would entail. He would have to destroy and wipe out everything. And so instead what he does is he comes with us. He comes with us. And one of the pictures of this morning, the title for our message is Wrapped in His Arms, because one of the pictures of this that we see throughout the scriptures is this picture of God who extends his arm. And it's a picture that you see actually woven throughout the whole of the scriptures. And one of the first places that you see it crop up is in its description of what happens in the Exodus. You remember the story of the Exodus? Israel they are in that dark place. They are home alone. They are scared. They are worried as they're enslaved to Egypt. And then God steps in. He comes alongside and he rescues them from out of that place. And what happens there is described as being the arm of the Lord coming alongside them in their time of struggle and strengthening them. So Deuteronomy 5:15, it says this: remember, you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. And then Deuteronomy 33:27, the eternal God is your refuge underneath the everlasting arms. He will drive out your enemies before you. So this picture that actually the arms of the Lord are there in the scriptures. There's this great symbol of strength for people that are struggling with life, for people that feel home alone at Christmas, for people that are struggling with the financial pressure of the season. The picture is that God is a God who reaches out with arms of strength to those that are in times of need. And that's really what that picture of the arm is about. When you picture that word arm, it's a kind of anthropomorphic thing. It's kind of picturing something about God that doesn't mean he's got arms, but is saying something about him. And as we see that, you're supposed to picture this great arm of strength, right? If you know James, who plays drums, you might have noticed he goes to the gym. Imagine James's arms, right? This not James that does the computer. No offense, James that does the computer. James that does the drums. Like, that is the picture, of this symbol of, poor James, this symbol of strength. God comes alongside and he's strong. And he comes alongside those that are in moments of weakness. And he offers to us his strength. And, I was amazed this week. We shared a bit already about Peter Flynn. But I went to go and see him in hospital after it happened. And he didn't know I was coming, but I came in and he was there, sat there in hospital with this horrific head injury. And as I came in, he was sat there with his Bible open reading the Psalms. I thought it was beautiful. And then his phone is ringing, and he's like not answering his phone, but his phone's just ringing off the hook, basically with people from church ringing him up to check on him and see how he is. And like I can tell from his face, behind the black eye and all the rest of it, he's having a great time. And and bless him. And I said to him, and Peter, he said to me straight away, he said, Jamie, it works. The NHS and the church, it works. And that was it. And I thought, this is amazing, isn't it? Here, poor Peter has been through the most horrific thing. And yet he's standing here saying it works because God is the one who comes alongside and strengthens. And that both happens as we read the scriptures, as Peter's reading the Psalms. I believe the Holy Spirit's meeting him and strengthening him. But also, God works through his body, the church, doesn't it? And so it's actually us as we come together and gather around people that are feeling in those moments home alone, that we strengthen them, don't we? And so actually, first thing I really want you to know is about this Christmas message of God who steps into our stories, that he does that to offer you strength, to face the things that you struggle to face yourself, to find the strength to face things like, getting rushed to A&E because you've just had a horrible head injury, or whatever it is you're facing in this moment. He wants to extend to you his strength. But as you go through the scriptures, this story, it develops and moves beyond just the arm of the Lord being something that happens in the Exodus. So it becomes then a picture that's then picked up by the prophets. And it speaks of a time to the prophets that, again, I won't go into all the context, but they are writing in a time when, again, people are feeling weak and afraid and powerless, and they're feeling home alone. And in those moments, there's this message that comes of God, who is this great arm that is coming to help them. So a few places, this picks up Isaiah 59. We're going to be jumping in Isaiah a little bit. It's like going to be a greatest hits of Isaiah from the rest of the message. Isaiah 59 verse 1. Surely the arm of the Lord is not too short to save, nor his ear too dull to hear. Let me just find it. Isaiah 51 verse 5. My righteousness draws near speedily. My salvation is on the way, and my arm will bring justice to the nations. The islands will look to me and wait in hope for my arm. So again, that psalm there, that verse in Isaiah, talking about the arm of the Lord, bringing the one that brings salvation. So salvation, meaning quite literally to heal, comes from the word salve, as in you put a salve on to heal. Salvation means to heal. So the Lord is the one that is going to come and heal and bring justice against strength, but also that idea that the arm of the Lord is not too short to save. So we see God's arms are strong, like James's, that plays the drums, but they're also really long. He's got long and strong arms. But this is wonderful news, right? Because I think so often, so many of us, for so many different reasons, don't we sometimes feel like we're a long way from the Lord? And maybe you're sat here today, and especially if maybe you've not been coming to church for long, and you're the person who's sort of slowly waiting for someone to tap you on the shoulder when they realize who you really are and quietly ask you to leave. And you're like, I'm just kind of waiting for that because I feel so unworthy to be here, to be in the Lord's presence, to be singing these songs, to be amongst these people, because I don't feel like I'm enough. Maybe because of all sorts of things in your life, you feel unworthy to even pray, to even know God, to believe that he would save you. Maybe it's an addiction or a habit. Maybe it's something in your life right now. Maybe it's something really serious. Maybe you're sat here today and you're actually having an affair in your marriage. Maybe you know that there's something that you have committed that is an actual crime. Maybe there is an addiction in your life that is eating you alive and you haven't told anybody about it because you can't. Well, do you know, even those massive things, and you're sat and you feel like there's this massive barrier between me and the Lord, the arm of the Lord is not too short to save. He can reach you no matter where you are, no matter how far you run, no matter how distant from him you feel. His arms are strong and he'll come and strengthen you, but they're long. He will come and he will reach out to you no matter where you are. So his arms are long enough, his arms are strong enough. Isaiah 59, verse 15 and 16. Truth is, I'll go from Isaiah 15b. The Lord looked and was displeased that there was no justice. He saw there was no one, and he was appalled to say there was no one to intervene. So his own arm achieved salvation for him, and his own righteousness sustained him. And then it goes on. He put on his righteousness as a breastplate, the helmet of salvation as his head. He put on garments of vengeance and wrapped himself in zeal as a cloak. And now this is a bit of a strange passage. It seems that God asks a question at the start of it. He says, who is there that can go out and perform justice? Who is there to intervene? I see there's no justice. Who can I send to go and intervene? I know, I'll send my arm. I'll send my arm to... So God's arms are strong, his arms are long, and his arms are wireless. It seems he can detach them and send them off to go and do things, which is a bit of a strange image, isn't it? Obviously, that the arms of the Lord could be sent out. And then he says, it goes on, and it seems like he's still talking to his arm. And he says, he, talking his arm, will put on his righteousness as a breastplate and the helmet of salvation on his head, and the garment of vengeance, wrapped himself in zeal as a cloak. And so all these, his arm is going to wear a cloak. This is a very strange picture, isn't it? But as you read through the rest of Isaiah, and as you understand this passage, what you realize is that this theme of the arm of the Lord develops into a prophecy and into a hope of the Lord Jesus, that he is the arm of the Lord. He is the arm of the Lord who comes in strength. He is the arm of the Lord who stretches down, who is long enough. He is the arm of the Lord that goes further than that, though, and actually steps out of heaven, is wireless, and comes to dwell amongst us, and comes close to us. And I think this is such a beautiful picture. This is the good news of Christmas, isn't it? That no matter who you are and what you've done, that Jesus is so able to stretch out and reach you that he departs from heaven to come and live a life amongst you. He steps out in strength. He steps out and he reaches right out. But also there's something more about this further that I want to show you. And to do that, we're going to turn to Isaiah chapter 40. I told you, we're all over the place in Isaiah this morning. But another truth, I think, about this arm and the things that it brings. So we've heard about it brings strength, which we see again in this passage, but also something else. So Isaiah 40 verse 9. You who bring good news to Zion, go up high on the mountain. You who bring good news to Jerusalem, lift up your voice with a shout. Lift it up and do not be afraid. Say to the towns of Judah, here is your God. See, the sovereign Lord comes with power, and he rules, there it is again, with a mighty arm. See, his reward is with him, and his recompense accompanies him. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms. He carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. So do you see again, Hope Church, here is your God, the arm that comes with mighty power. But then do you see the second bit? Right, he comes with mighty power, his arms are long and he reaches out to us, but also his arms are the one that gently and tenderly gathers the sheep in them and holds onto them closely and tightly. And that's what Jesus is, isn't it? He's not distant, but he comes close. And there's something here that I think speaks of intimacy. Okay, so we have strength, we have his ability to reach out, but we also have God, the arm of God that comes to you in the most intimate of natures to comfort you, to tend to you, to protect you, to hold you. Now you might think this is a bit smushy language, Jamie, saying that God gives me a hug. Well, it's kind of pretty much what it's saying, isn't it? That God is the one who steps out with love and compassion to hold you. And I know this is a bit of a weird thing to talk about, isn't it? Because, but actually I believe these things are the same. His power and his love are not opposite forces. They're actually the same. His power is his love, and his love is his power. It's the love of Jesus. It's the love of God that springs him from the grave and sends him there in the first place. It's the love and the power of God that brings salvation in your life. And it's the love and the power of God that will transform you into his likeness. Those two things are not opposites. They're the same. And so the way that his power, the strength of his arm is operated is in this picture of the shepherd that comes and gently, tenderly cares for and looks after. And that's amazing, isn't it? I think that one of the things that I think we so struggle with sometimes in life, and maybe especially at Christmas, is intimacy. And you think the word intimacy, you probably think of, something, I don't know what, you probably think of something else if you say the word intimacy, right? But, I think actually what that word means is not actually sex. What it means is drawing close to someone and being fully seen for who you really are. And I think so many of us in life struggle to find places where we feel like we can have that kind of intimacy. And we might find it with our spouse. Hopefully we do. And that's somewhere you feel that you can be fully seen. But for many of us, that might not be the case. For many of us, we might have a friend who we feel like we can do that with, and we feel fully seen, like they really know us. But for some of us, we don't. For some of us, we're surrounded by people, and yet in none of those relationships we feel like we have that place of true intimacy where we're truly seen and we're truly known. And of course, in that place, naturally, that is where we start to feel most alone, isn't it? Most feel those feelings of home alone. Like I said at the start, that's sometimes why Christmas can be so hard, because we're surrounded by all these superficial relationships, and yet we have no intimacy. We have no intimacy, and we have so much in our hearts as humans that desires to be in that place where we're fully known and we're fully seen and where people get us. Like, there's nobody that gets me. And you just want to know there's at least one person out there who really gets you. And to some extent, this will always be true, because there are people, even with your own spouse, there are probably things, burdens that you carry that you feel like you can't share with them, partly because you love them and you don't want to burden them with something that you're struggling with. And so sometimes we hold on to these things because we feel like we can't share them and they consume us. And it's amazing, isn't it, therefore, to know that God is the God who steps out with strength, that reaches down to us and holds his arm out to us and is intimate with us. He's not a God who stays in heaven distant from us, but he's born as a human. And he experiences a regular birth just like any of us, and he throws up and he has colic and he cries. Not that any of this is familiar to me. And all that sort of stuff, he goes through it all, and then he grows up and he knows the pains of becoming an adult and all that entails. And then we see in the Gospels, he weeps at the death of his friend Lazarus, and he experiences grief. We see as he's in the desert, he experiences temptation, just like any of us. We see that as he's in the garden, and he has this very rare condition where under extreme stress, the blood vessels on your head burst, and you start to sweat blood, and he starts to sweat blood, and he experiences stress and anxiety, just like all of us. And he experiences the depth of human life and of human experience. But you might think, well, that's great, but that's still not quite enough, because, in case you haven't noticed, I'm not a first century Jewish rabbi. And so, how does he really know and understand everything that I've experienced and everything that I've been through? Sure, he might have an understanding of human life, but does he really know me? And of course, he's God and he knows everything, but it's one thing to know something and it's another thing to have known it by experience, isn't it? So does he really know me? And just a final chapter in Isaiah, if I can find where I've written my note for it. A final chapter in Isaiah 53. If you just turn there, if I can find it. Isaiah 53, as we're in that place of thinking, there's no one that knows me and understands me. Just hear these words and let them just minister to you in this moment. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. And yet we considered him punished by God, stricken and afflicted, but he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was laid on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, but the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. So do you see there's a point where actually Jesus takes up your pain. That's what it says. He takes up your pain. It says he bore your suffering. He bore your suffering. You feel like you're home alone and no one gets you and no one understands and no one has seen it. Well, Jesus says to you this morning, I have bore your suffering. I have taken up your pain and your grief. And it's hard to comprehend that. And part of it is like we don't know what happens on the cross as his arms are outstretched and he dies. What happens in those moments? We know he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And so the relationship that he has always known with his Father is separated. And in some senses, that is the cause of all of our pain. And he experiences that. And then he goes and he dies and he goes to the grave for 3 days. And in those moments of him dying, and Christians disagree about what happened as he was in the grave. And, did he die? Did he go to hell? People have different ideas on that. And the truth is, there's probably no really clear-cut answer on it. But I guess we understand this, that somehow in those moments, he experiences and he takes up and he holds your pain and your suffering and your grief and your heartache and your fears, as well as the things that we traditionally always think of, your sin, the things that you have done wrong, the times that you've given into temptation, and he knows it all because he took it on and he experienced it. And so you can't sit here this morning and think forever, well, no one gets me, and no one understands me, and no one has experienced what I've experienced, and I feel home alone this morning because nobody sees me, because Jesus understands it all. He doesn't just understand it all because he became a human being. He understands it all because he actually bore your suffering and your grief and your pain, and he took it to the cross, and he died for it, and he experienced it. And so you're not alone. He sees you this morning, and he gets you. And he understands you, and he knows you. At the end of Home Alone, Kevin McAllister, well, not the end, the rest of the film, Kevin McAllister, what he does basically is he, as you probably know if you've seen the film, he basically sets all these booby traps for the criminals, and that's basically how he overcomes his enemy, by creating all these booby traps. And and obviously he does it all himself. This little boy does it all by himself. And I think so often in our lives, as we're facing our biggest fears, as we're facing those feelings of being home alone, as we're struggling this Christmas with all sorts of things, that's the biggest temptation to face, isn't it? Is to think that actually we can do it all ourselves, rather than to lean in on him, to trust him, to in the stillness of your heart find those moments, a bit like Peter Flynn in hospital, as you're struggling to open the scriptures, to receive from him, to know that you're not home alone, and to allow him to minister to your heart. I read these words this week. I saw them, someone had put them on Facebook, from Matthew Perry, who is, you might know him as Chandler from Friends. And Pete Gregg, if you know Pete Gregg, he posted this on Facebook, a little quote from his autobiography. I thought it was brilliant. And this is what he writes. Matthew Perry, Chandler from Friends, he'd struggled for a long time with addiction in his life, and this is what he wrote. He said, word for word in the book, he said, "God, please help me," I whispered. "Show me that you're here. God, please help me." I started to cry. I mean, really started to cry. That shoulder-shaking, uncontrollable weeping. I wasn't crying because I was sad. I was crying because for the first time in my life, I felt okay. I felt safe. I felt taken care of. Decades of struggling with God and wrestling with life and sadness, all being washed away like a river of pain gone into oblivion. I'd been in the presence of God. I was certain of it. And this time I'd prayed the right thing. Help. Eventually the weeping subsided, but everything was different now. I stayed sober for 2 years based solely on that moment. God had shown me a slither of what life could be. He'd saved me that day and for all days, no matter what. He turned me into a seeker, not only of sobriety, but of truth and also of him. It's beautiful, isn't it? And my challenge to you this morning is maybe you are the person here who needs to pray that simple prayer for the first time, help. And know that the arm of the Lord is there, and he's strong enough and able to step into your situation and help you. His arm is long enough to be able to reach out and hold on to you and take you and pull you through. And his arm is also the Lord Jesus, who knows intimately everything that has ever happened in your life, and he understands it totally, and he's empathetic, and he gets it, and he gets you, and he's ready to receive you. All you have to do is to pray out in that moment, Lord, help me. Help me. And it takes great humility to do that, doesn't it? Be so much easier for so many of us in these moments to do what Kevin McAllister does in the film, which is to take it into our own hands, to do whatever it is that we can do with the limited resources in front of us to fight our own battles, rather than to sit back, cry out help, to call on the arm of the Lord and get him to fight for us. He's more than able, he's more than willing, and he's ready.